Hey, what's up? So I'm 35. I turned 36 this year. So I'm like kind of pretty deep in my mid 30s. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And in this video, I want to talk about how I think friendships change when you're in your 30s. So I'm sure you've seen this graphic before, but this is like a visual graphic of how much time you spend with your friends as you get older. So the x-axis here is your age, and the y-axis here is time, right? And you spend a lot of time in your 20s, and then some period in your late 20s to early 30s or mid 30s, you start hanging out with your friends uh, less pretty dramatically. So this is kind of the period of time I want to talk about. And previously in another video, I made this graph before where as you get older, I think the expectation of fun starts to go down, but then the reality of fun actually drops much faster. So you have this gap between expectation and reality, and that's what I like to call disappointment. I think everyone knows that formula. But kind of like just this area, I think like where's the widest is where you're kind of hitting your early 30s or mid 30s, right? I'm guessing it goes down from there. So I think it's pretty obvious what happens in your 30s is you start hanging out with your friends less, right? And I think kind of like when you maybe your late 20s it starts to like when you're 35, you start hitting these points. You start realizing these things where it's just like, oh man, the bar for having fun has just gotten, I don't know if it's gotten lower and lower or higher and higher, but it just basically becomes less fun, right? So here's a couple things that happen, when you're kind of transitioning from, late 20s to early 30s. It's like you can't go out to clubs anymore, for whatever reason. Maybe your body can't hang or you got fat, so you don't want to go out anymore. Um, you know, you start having parties and your parties start ending super early. Like everyone's like falling asleep by midnight, right? You start hanging out with your friends. All you do is just sit and just like sit around and you don't really do anything. And that's because that becomes a norm, right? You're like you can't do two things in one day because your body's too tired, or maybe you hang out with kids the first time in your life, and you're like, oh my god, like this is what hanging out with kids is like, and you start realizing how little fun it is, right? So there's just a series of things that hit you like year after year, where you're just like, oh my god, like I miss the good old days or whatever, or I didn't appreciate the good old days because you didn't know they were the good old days back then. So that's what happens in your 30s. And yeah, I think pretty obviously, like your social circle gets smaller. Like for example, I had my wedding 5 years ago, so when I was 30, and we had like 180 guests. If I were to have a wedding today, it'd be like 60 people, right? Just because like I didn't just because like your social circle just gets a lot smaller. Like whoever you hang out with just it gets less and less people, right? Not for any reason. You didn't lose friendships. It's just like you just don't see people as much. You definitely have less energy, less motivation. Your body can't hang anymore. Like I said earlier, maybe it's because like you got fat or whatever. But it's also like you can't drink, you can't process alcohol like you did. Can't do drugs anymore. You go to sleep late and your whole week is fucked. You have more responsibility. Like now you have a mortgage. You got probably a better paying job. You maybe have kids, and you just have different priorities. Like things aren't your friends just aren't priorities right now. Your priorities probably like making money, right? So these are obviously obvious things that change in your 30s. But I kind of wanted to analyze a little bit more. So I thought about it, and I thought there's like a couple of key reasons on why you just don't hang out with your friends as much. And the first one, I don't know no particular order, but I think one thing is logistics, right? So more than likely you're in a relationship and you have a significant other, and now you're not just planning for yourself, you're planning with one other person, right? So it's two times more difficult to plan stuff. And then your friend that you want to hang out with also has a significant other, and they now it's like two times harder for them. I don't know how the math works. Maybe it's like eight times harder for the four of you, or is it four times harder? I don't know, but it's harder, right? And then there's also other factors like what if you don't get along with your significant others or your friend's significant other, or what if your spouses don't get along, or whatever it is, right? So there's just more factors which causes it more difficulty, which just leads to less hanging out. And another thing is because now you have two other people, it's like or one other person is like your calendar is more packed, right? Because now you have to go to family stuff for two different people. There's other things. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, like when you're in your 20s, you can just do shit. In your 30s, it's like you have a calendar now, and it's packed for like the next 3 weeks or next 3 months or whatever. So if you want to plan something, you have to plan super far ahead. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it happens. It happens to everyone. Just trust me on that one. Um, and then I think what happens is like things don't change in your life as much. Like before, it was like, yeah, you went to college and then you got your job and things are happening. You're dating different guy or whatever, and there's a lot of updates. But then once you're kind of in your 30s, you're married, you have a stable job. Like not a lot of things change, and then you don't have a lot to talk about anymore. And then you also like your social circle is like not the same anymore, so you don't really know the same people anymore, right? So it's just like less to talk about, and because there's more stability in your life, if that makes sense. And then also I don't think anyone mentions this, but I think things are just less fun by definition. Like everything that you thought was fun before, you've already done a bunch of times, and you've already had the same parties, you have the same conversations. Like every time you get together, you tell the same stories, right? And then over the course of 8 years or 10 years or whatever, it's like you've already said this story like 45 times. Like there's not much else to be said. So by definition, things just become less fun, which is kind of sad. Another thing, like, and then people have kids, right? And then like when people have kids, like you just auto split between people that have kids and people who don't have kids. So like right away, your friendship group just gets cut in half. Not to say you can't hang out with people that have kids if you don't have kids, but it just your definition of fun is just different. So like for example, like one time my wife's friend's husband was telling me about he just had a kid. He was like, "Yeah, I get so excited when I get to go to get boba, right?" And that's like a big deal for him. And then like for someone that doesn't have kids, like that's not something that you would get excited about, right? So just the bar is different because they have so much more responsibility. So just naturally you would split. Like people that have kids don't expect you to hang out with them and do the things that they find fun because the bar is so low for them, right? It kind of just happens. So that's another reason why your social circle doesn't get split pretty quickly. I think another factor that happens is like you start valuing time with your parents. So like I think in your 20s or whatever, you kind of don't want to starting from when you're like a teenager to like maybe when you're 27 or whatever, you don't really want to hang out with your parents because well, for whatever reason they're uncool or you want to you prioritize your friends. But then actually after a while you start prioritizing your parents because you start realizing, oh, my parents were people too. They were just like me 30 years ago, and they didn't know what they were doing. And you start seeing how shitty kids are, and you start realizing, oh, I was such a shitty kid back then to my parents. And you're like, oh man, like I need to talk to my parents more, and they become more like peers. So it becomes more fun to hang out with their parents, but there's more to talk about now, right? Versus like the opposite, the other way around. Yeah, and then I think because there's when you're younger in your 20s, like partying holds everyone together. But once you stop partying as much, you start realizing that hey, I actually need something more than just partying to hold this relationship together. And for a lot of people, like that, it just kind of goes away because you don't really have that anymore. So that's another factor I think that happens. I think another factor that happens. I mean, this happens when you're younger as well, but I think it's even worse when you're older. And it's like that. It's like you don't want to try too hard, right? Or you're unsure if other people want to hang out. And before, this wasn't really a factor as much as like let's say you're in your 20s or you're in college and everyone wants to hang out. You're not really worried about overstepping. But then when you're in your 30s, you can become more concerned about overstepping. And there's always a group of people that you wouldn't overstep, right? But then even those people, you start being concerned. Like I have a best friend that I've been best friends with since fifth grade, and then like I will hang out. I was at his house like the other day, um, and it's like midnight, and like we're just watching TV, and it's like I'm not sure when he wants to go to bed. Like, and then like I don't know if I should just leave because it's like midnight, right? And like when we were younger, we would be drinking and doing all this stuff, but now we're just like watching TV. So I was like, hey, maybe I should just go home and get a really nice sleep. I don't know if he wants me to go home. He's not acting like he does, but like I don't want to overstay my welcome. And this is like my best friend. So like you can imagine if it was like someone I didn't know as well, that would be even wider, right? So then I think because of this factor, like people start hanging out less because you just don't want to intrude. Also, I think it's harder to make new friends. Obviously, it's hard to make new friends as you get older because there are not a lot of chances. And then like people that you kind of know, it's like people get weirder and weirder as they grow up. And I don't want to say weird, but people get different when they grow up, right? So like, like you might think a certain way when you're a kid, and then you might differ as you grow older, and people just become really really different people. And because people are so different, it's just harder to make friends than when they're younger. They're more the same. And then there's not as many chances to make friends as well because you're not like going to school or seeing someone all the time. And then I think what happens is snowballs. Like let's say you have a friend that you don't see for a year, then it becomes weird for you to hit them up because you haven't talked to them for a year. But the only reason you haven't talked to them for a year is because of all the other things I just mentioned, right? So it just snowballs. It becomes normal to not see them, and that's what happens. Like when I was like 28 or no 27, uh, a lot of my friends moved in together, and then we decided to not get a TV. And this is when we started a company. So it was like my brother and one of my good friends and my wife. It was three of us, four of us were living together, and all three of us were in a company together. And so we got a house together. We were working on this company, and then so we worked in the living room. And then because we didn't have a TV in the living room, we just never hung out in the living room. So then we would just work in the living room, and then we would go back up to our rooms. And then after like a year, this became kind of weird because like we would just go downstairs work, and we just go back to our rooms. We just never hung out because that's like what the norm was. But if we had a TV there, or we kind of hung out in the living room before. Oh, and then like one of my friends moved out, someone else moved in, and then we got a TV, and then we didn't work out of there anymore. We just like all hung out in the living room now. So it was just weird because like what you're used to, it just starts to snowball, and then basically that just happens. So yeah. So I guess what can you do to improve your social life? I think the first thing is to notice what's happening. And a lot of times people kind of fall out of hanging out, not because of anyone's doing it on purpose. It's because of all things I just mentioned. Things just happen and it's kind of out of your control. It's just really natural for it to happen. But if you're aware of what's happening, then you can prevent it from happening, right? And I think you just gotta know, like, people feel like you too. People, like, maybe you feel like, oh, like, I haven't seen this friend in, X amount of months or years. Maybe they want to hang out with me. They're probably feeling the same way. So it's up to you to actively try to hang out. And I think it's actually more normal when you get older to network. So try to network either socially or professionally. But I think socially networking is actually a lot more normal and a lot more accepted. And I think also in your 30s, people have way better social skills. They have etiquette, and it's easier. It's actually easier to interact with people because I mean, in general, people are better at like having conversation. People are more respectful, and it's easier to talk to people because they have better social skills. So for these reasons, I think it's actually some positives to make new friends in your 30s. So I think it's interesting to kind of look at what's happening, and then if you're struggling with hanging out with people in your 30s, I think if you're aware of these things, it's a lot easier for you to make new friends. So hope this helps. Thank you.